You know Shia LaBeouf is the blockbuster star from Transformers and the kid from Even Stevens. His rise was one of the most explosive in Hollywood history, a true prodigy who seemed to have it all. But what if the public meltdowns, the arrests, and the bizarre performance art weren't the real story? The shocking truth is that his entire life, from his chaotic childhood to his blockbuster fame, was a carefully constructed performance to hide a deeper trauma. And the final, devastating collapse was the one role he never saw coming, leading to a confession where he admitted, "I have been abusive to myself and everyone around me for years," and a fall from grace so complete that he became a Hollywood ghost. This is the story of the prodigy who fell harder than anyone thought possible. People think Shia LaBeouf was manufactured in a Burbank studio, but the truth is, he was forged in the chaos of a Los Angeles most tourists never see. Born to a ballerina-turned-visual artist mother and a comedy club-hopping, drug-addicted Vietnam vet father, Shia's childhood was less Mickey Mouse Club and more Fight Club. His dad, Jeffrey, was his first and most demanding acting coach, pushing him to perform stand-up routines for a crowd that was more interested in their next fix than punchlines. We all come from childhood, and Shia's was a masterclass in survival. The family's home in Echo Park was a world away from the glamour of Hollywood, a place where raw talent was the only currency that mattered. It was his mother, Shayna, who provided a lifeline, her world of art and ballet a stark contrast to his father's self-destruction. This push and pull, between chaos and creativity, between the gutter and the gallery, would become the central theme of his entire life. The escape hatch appeared in the form of a Disney Channel audition. The role was Louis Stevens, the hyperactive, troublemaking little brother on Even Stevens. It was a part that required a specific kind of manic, unfiltered energy, and for Shia, it wasn't much of a stretch. He'd spent his whole life being the loudest guy in the room just to be heard. He landed the part, and in 2003, that raw, chaotic energy won him a Daytime Emmy. Disney had its star, but they had no idea what they'd actually brought into the fold. His big screen test came with holes. It was a hit, proving the kid from the Disney show could actually act. But while other child stars might have taken the safe path, Shia was already different. The discipline of a big studio set was a cage. He was an Echo Park kid playing by Burbank rules, and the friction was already starting to spark. The prodigy was out of the neighborhood, but the neighborhood wasn't out of the prodigy. And Hollywood was about to find out what happens when you give that kind of raw, unprocessed trauma a multi-million-dollar platform. So you've got a Daytime Emmy and a hit family movie. What's the logical next step? If you're a sane person, maybe a nice indie drama. If you're Shia LaBeouf, you strap yourself to the front of a transforming alien muscle car and become one of the most famous people on the planet. How did a single phone call from Michael Bay turn the Echo Park kid into a global superstar? What did he do that made Steven Spielberg himself send a model B-17 bomber as a stop talking gift? And why was getting arrested at a Walgreens just the start of the problem? This is where the machine takes over. The call came in 2006. Michael Bay was casting Transformers. This wasn't another cute kid role. This was a $150 million bet on who could lead the next decade of blockbusters. And for some reason, Bay looked at the manic energy of Louis Stevens and saw Sam Witwicky. The film exploded in 2007, making over $700 million worldwide and turning Shia LaBeouf into the face of a generation. He was no longer an actor, he was a franchise, and the machine demanded more. Immediately after, he was cast as the son of Indiana Jones himself in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. His star was white hot. But Shia, being Shia, couldn't just play the grateful Hollywood newcomer. In a now infamous 2008 interview, he straight up said the new indie film dropped the ball and lacked heart. It was the kind of honesty that gets you blacklisted, or at the very least, a very angry phone call from a legend. The story goes that Steven Spielberg's response wasn't a phone call, but a delivered gift. A beautiful, detailed model of a B-17 bomber. The message was clear: stop bombing your own movies. It was a classy move, but it was also the first major sign that the blockbuster machine and the kid from Echo Park were fundamentally incompatible. Because while he was playing the all-American hero on screen, the old habits were starting to surface off it. That same year, he was arrested for trespassing and obstruction at a Chicago Walgreens after a confrontation with security. The charges were minor, but the pattern was set. The chaos he'd used to survive Echo Park and to fuel his early performances didn't just switch off when the cameras stopped rolling. In fact, with a global platform and a massive paycheck, it had more room to breathe than ever. He finished the Transformers trilogy, but you could see the strain. By the time Dark of the Moon wrapped in 2011, he was done. He publicly announced his retirement from blockbuster films. It was a move that shocked Hollywood. Most actors kill for that kind of stability. But for Shia, the machine wasn't a dream. It was a gilded cage, amplifying every one of his demons until he couldn't hear himself think. He walked away from a fortune, but the real cost of being the machine's favorite part was just beginning to add up. So you walk away from a guaranteed $50 million payday. What do you do for an encore? If you're Shia LaBeouf, you don't just make indie films, you turn your entire life into one. How do you go from fighting Decepticons to sitting in a room with a paper bag on your head? What does live streaming yourself watching all your own movies for 3 days straight actually solve? And when does art just become a public cry for help? This is where the line between genius and meltdown officially blurs. Free from the constraints of Michael Bay and giant robots, Shia dove headfirst into the world of avant-garde cinema and performance art. He started collaborating with artists like Nastia Sede-Runco, and the projects got weird. Not quirky indie weird, but is this guy okay weird? In 2014, he launched #IamSorry, an installation in a Los Angeles gallery. For days, he sat silently in a room with a paper bag over his head that read, "I am not famous anymore." Visitors could interact with him one-on-one. Some cried, some yelled. He just sat there. It was either a brilliant commentary on celebrity or a man having a very public, very expensive breakdown. Maybe both. If that wasn't enough, he topped it with #AllMyMovies in 2015. He live-streamed himself from a New York theater, watching every single one of his films back-to-back for over 72 hours. The world watched him watch himself, slowly deteriorating from energetic kid to blockbuster star to whatever this was. It was a marathon of self-flagellation, a public autopsy of his own career. But the art wasn't just confined to a gallery. His life became the performance. In June 2014, he was arrested for being drunk, disruptive, and smoking cigarettes during a Broadway performance of Cabaret. He allegedly heckled the actors and fought with the ushers. The police had to haul him out. This wasn't a script. It was a police report. The indie films from this era, Nymphomaniac, Charlie Countryman, were often as raw and unhinged as his public persona. He was bleeding all over the screen, using roles to process his trauma in real time. The blockbuster machine had tried to sand down his edges, but now he was sharpening them into weapons, turning them on himself and anyone who got too close. He wasn't just making art about his pain, he was building a museum for it and charging admission. The performance was captivating, terrifying, and it was clear that the final act was going to be a train wreck. You can only run from your past for so long before it corners you in a cheap motel room with a court order. What happens when the performance art stops and the real-life lawsuits begin? How do you go from writing an Oscar-worthy script in rehab to being accused of being a real-life monster? And what do you say when there are no more characters to hide behind? This is where the bill for a lifetime of chaos finally comes due. The turning point, ironically, was also his most critically acclaimed work. In 2017, after a string of arrests, including a viral one in Savannah, Georgia, where he screamed at cops while handcuffed, Shia finally hit a wall. He checked into a rehab facility. His therapy? Writing a script. That script became Honey Boy, a semi-autobiographical film that laid his traumatic childhood and toxic relationship with his father bare. It was hailed as a masterpiece of catharsis. He had taken his pain and alchemized it into art. Hollywood was ready to forgive the troubled prodigy. It seemed like the ultimate redemption arc. But life, especially Shia's, is never that simple. While he was playing his own father on screen, he was allegedly becoming him off it. During the filming of Honey Boy, he began a relationship with the singer FKA Twigs. What started as a creative partnership soon descended into what she would later describe in a lawsuit as a living nightmare. In December 2020, she filed a lawsuit against him, alleging sexual battery, assault, and infliction of emotional distress. Another ex, Carolyn Foe, came forward with similar claims. The allegations were graphic and horrifying. They painted a picture not of a troubled artist, but of an abusive and manipulative man. The court of public opinion, which had tolerated his antics for years, rendered a swift and final verdict. Faced with this, Shia didn't give a typical PR denial. He sent a raw, unfiltered email to the New York Times. "I'm not in any position to tell anyone how my behavior made them feel. I have no excuses for my alcoholism or aggression, only rationalizations. I have been abusive to myself and everyone around me for years." It was the most honest performance of his life, and it was a confession. He was admitting that the chaos wasn't just for the art, it had real human victims. The performance was over. All that was left was the wreckage. The Prodigy was now a pariah, and this was one scandal that couldn't be solved by sitting in a room with a paper bag on his head. So what's left when the court of public opinion has reached its verdict? The lawsuits are filed, and the apologies have been emailed. You become a ghost. How do you navigate Hollywood when you've been officially blacklisted? Is there a path back from total cancellation, or do you just fade into a bizarre, low-budget shadowland? And what's the final ironic twist for an actor who once commanded $25 million? The fallout was immediate and absolute. LaBeouf was dropped by his agency and publicist. The Hollywood that had once lined up to give him franchises now acted like he had the plague. Offers didn't just dry up, they evaporated. The blockbuster path was sealed shut forever. His comeback wasn't playing a superhero, it was playing a desperate, washed-up version of himself in the gritty corners of cinema. He entered what can only be called his Siberian period, appearing in a string of micro-budget films you'd be hard-pressed to find on a streaming menu. The Madman, Boss Level, Pieces of a Woman. The budgets were so small they probably wouldn't have covered his craft service tab on a Transformers set. The one flicker of light was Father Stu, a small drama where he played a supporting role as a boxer-turned-priest. Of course, that was exactly the kind of redemption-themed project he couldn't pass up. It was a modest success, but a success measured in pennies compared to his former life. His only real win came from behind the camera, as a producer on the surprise 2023 hit Sound of Freedom. The film, made for $15 million, raked in over $250 million. It was a stark lesson. Shia LaBeouf the actor was toxic, but Shia LaBeouf the behind-the-scenes creative could still quietly turn a profit. So what's left for the ghost? He's got a couple of aces he's been clutching. There's talk, always talk, of him returning to direct and star in a fifth Lethal Weapon, a passion project to honor the late Richard Donner. And he's still threatening to make his two-part Passion of the Christ sequel, claiming he's secured an insane $200 million. We'll believe it when we see it. Until then, we watch him pop up in curiosities like Megalomania and wonder if this is the final form of the Echo Park Prodigy. Not a glorious comeback, but a permanent low-frequency hum in the background, a cautionary tale still searching for a third act that may never come. He chose this path, carving it out with his own hands, hitting a bottom not because of bad roles, but entirely by his own doing. So what's the final verdict on Shia LaBeouf? A brilliant actor? A damaged soul? Or just the logical conclusion of a childhood spent performing for survival? The comments section is now your courtroom. If you have a taste for more stories about the messy, complicated humans behind the Hollywood headlines, you know what to do. Leave a like if you are fascinated, subscribe if you want more, and we'll see you next time.